Dobro večer, good evening, and welcome to tonight's lecture. My name is Biljana Tanurovska-Kjulavkovski, and I come from Lokomotiva, who is organizer of tonight's lecture. And briefly, I would like to announce the lecture is titled Politics of the Commons, and we have a pleasure to have Jovana Timotijević as a lecturer tonight. I would like to welcome Jovana as well as Ivana Dragšić, who will moderate the discussion which will follow after Jovana's lecture, and she will also introduce Jovana a bit more. Ivana, I would introduce a bit Ivana. Ivana is a colleague and a collaborator. She is a sociologist and an activist working in relation to commons, as well as ecology, climate changes, and issues related to that. And she writes and curates projects in that direction. However, I would like to give a couple of words before give the space to Ivana and Jovana to say a bit what is the context in which we are organizing this lecture tonight. It is a program activity we named Other Spaces, and it's part of our European project, ACT, Art, Climate and Transition, and consists of different lectures, discussions, discursive programs, artistic researches, and other formats we are developing through what we are trying to open up a space, different spaces, not only materially related spaces, but spaces more like understanding as spaces for reflecting, questioning, and mapping the role and responsibility of culture and art in our society today, their political action and relation to the issues related to what we are saying as erosion and appropriation of public goods and the environmental catastrophe as we see it today. So furthermore of our program is having a name to find ways how culture and art can work together with similar actions in other fields and come together and oppose these practices of extractivism and devastation of the public, and try to advocate for the development and preservation of public goods and the environment. And therefore, so far this year, we developed different lines of lectures. One which was about ecofeminism with Suzana Milevska. Then we had a lecture by Višnja Kisić and Goran Tomka about ecological turn in culture. Then we had artistic researches on urban gardens by Anna Lazarevska. And the last, it was before this lecture, was the discussion culture on the age of crisis with Ivana Dragšić that we developed together, where we had the guests, our colleagues, cultural workers, artists and activists, Simona Getova, Ana Jovanovska, Viki Mladenova, Zoran Petrovski, and Artan Sadiko. And we are trying after this lecture next year to wrap up this year with this lecture and continue, hopefully, a collaborative, next year collaborative project that we are going to do together with Ploštac Sloboda, Lokomotiva, and hopefully Zajedničko from Belgrade, a conference in the next year where we would try to open up questions more in this direction. So I will stop here and just I would say that these activities and this opening of different spaces where we can reflect in this relation is thanks to the support of Creative Europe program and City of Skopje and Ministry of Culture of Republic of North Macedonia. So that's it from me. Thank you for all my colleagues in Lokomotiva for supporting and organizing also this lecture tonight. And Ivana and Jovana, floor is yours now, just to say that everyone who wants to pose the questions after the lecture can leave it below on the Facebook stream. And we can share it with Ivana and with Jovana. So, Ivana, Jovana.
1, 2, ok. Hi, hello. Thank you, Biljana, for the welcome, and thank you, Lokomotiva, for putting together the series of events that you just spoke of. I'm happy to be the host and moderator of tonight's event and lecture, especially because it comes from a very dear friend and colleague of mine, Jovana Timotijević. Hi, welcome. Jovana, I don't know for how long now, but we have been going back and forth on our issues and in our region for a very, very while now. And I I feel like we have been on the same frequency of activism and politics and including arts and culture and such civilizational practices in the whole process. I will just briefly introduce you formally after saying that you're my friend, and then I'll give the floor to you. Okay?
Perfect.
Jovana, for everyone that doesn't know Jovana Timotijević, she holds an MA in Architecture and Gender Studies and is currently working on her PhD at the Faculty of Political Sciences in Belgrade. She is a member of the Ministry of Space Collective from Belgrade, engaged in research and education in the field of democratization of urban planning, urban commons, and the right to housing. She is also a co-founder of the Platform for Theory and Practice of Commons, Zajedničko, as Biljana mentioned. And for those of you maybe not so much into the topic, but already maybe interested, it's a very, very um, steady, healthy source of knowledge about this issue. The issue of the commons, Jovana, we have uh, apart from doing the work in our cities and in our communities, we have produced some work even together. Just a couple of years ago, we
Yes.
produced the the case study, the book about the commons, the situation of the commons in the Western Balkans. You have it right there. Um, but also, in the meantime, some other publications released. What we are seeing from the situation we are all in now, we are trying to overcome a one paradigm that we consider to be a trap, the Tina paradigm. There is no alternative paradigm. That paradigm states that we have to choose between two things. Our position is that we have tried both those things. They didn't work. Some of it more, some of it less. Um,
Mm.
but more and more in the world, globally, based on the theory of Elinor Ostrom, more and more in the world, we are getting aware about some other types of practices within self-organizing and governance organizing that exist through the world, and that can apply to different resources, material, immaterial, and seems like a really, really this whole 20 years, the first 20 years of the 21st century seem like the great time to try learn something from those practices and not replicate, but try to implement such an access to approach to our political organizing. I'm talking about the theory of the commons, and I'm talking about overcoming the dualism of the market and the state, of the two, let's say, ends of the two
Mm.
extremes. I'm not saying that this concept is mediocre, is in the middle, because it's not. We like to call it even radical democracy sometimes. I will give you the floor to give you a lecture. I would just like to maybe recommend everyone who's watching and who would like to pose questions. You can probably even do it during the lecture so that you have you have the moment and the precise information that you want to ask, but just try to pose really not short, but really concise and precise questions that will not take a lot of time to be read, understood, and answered. Jovana, please welcome.
Thank you, Ivana. Thank you. I think you actually summed it up. I don't know what is the point of my presentation. No, I really, I mean, you did mention actually the core of it. Just before that, I would also like to thank Lokomotiva for the invitation and for considering this as a significant subject. And thank you, Ivana, for a really wonderful introduction, because you really, I think you presented really the core. I will try to go around it and maybe fill it out with some more information. Perhaps some of you are already informed or already know something about the commons. Maybe maybe there are some I don't know, information that will be relevant for you in this. I hope so. But more than that, I really hope for a really good discussion after it, because as with any kind of concept, the concept as well has its discontents, and then so we can talk about it more. I just wanted to say that, as Ivan introduced, I'm really talking about the commons not from any kind of academic position, but rather from an activist position who has an activist who has really, in a way, went through some kind of collective self-education about commons. So I'm emotionally and rationally interested in commons because of the practice and analysis that we do. So that is the position, also a very biased position, I might say, that I will be talking from. So I will share presentation just because it might be easier for some of you to follow, and also I won't go through the details that are on the screen. Okay, so as Ivana said, I'm coming from two entities, both Ministry of Space Collective that deals more with the spatial practices and spatial justice, and also from the platform Zajedničko that is actually dealing more in depth with the commons and different practices and aspects of commons. So I will also mention both of these practices as I'm coming from them in the presentation as well. So not to go too much into the theory, as I'm not in any way competent in being some kind of like a master in theory of the commons, but also I think that there are some aspects that of the very notion of commons that we need to mention, at least in order to maybe later go into the examples that I try to assemble that are coming from the region, so we can maybe also discuss, and hopefully you will also have, aside from what Ivana has presented in this publication, maybe we can also talk about some of the commons-based practices that you are aware of or you are close to. So I just wanted to go briefly, as I said, through some of the points that are analyzing the notion of commons. I recommend this book that Ivana has co-authored precisely because it really offers a very insightful and very detailed theoretical insight into the commons, and also a kind of historical overview into some of the practices of the commons. But anyway, whether we talk about the different languages, the common, the very notion, the very word common actually keeps or guards this idea of having some kind of shared resource. We will talk about what kind of resource and in what way it is shared, but this sharing issue or sharing aspect is one of the key aspects, and I think key values that the commons today, when we talk about the commons practices today, are still keeping as a priority feature. Also, there is, I'm sorry, just 1 second. So there is, I'm not going to, because of the time, and I'm not going to go too much into detail. I would like to focus more on the contemporary manifestations and practices of the commons, but just wanted to point that there are elements of what we today call commons in different historical times. And it's whether we talk about the prehistoric hunter societies before the emergence of the private property, or we talk about feudalism and afterwards. But there were some, I mean, what we retroactively recognized as elements of commons existed in really along the historical continuum. And what actually happened, I mean, to the commons is, first of all, this huge wave of enclosure of commons that had happened, since 15th of century, what Marx calls primitive accumulation, but the enclosure of commons that actually continued and transformed into what Harvey calls accumulation by dispossession. And actually it's another wave of enclosure, not so much, I mean, yes, of the private and common and public property, but also of public services. And I think, I mean, for me, it was really a great enlightenment, if I can say it. But when I read what Ursula Hughes called a second primitive accumulation, when she talked about the privatization of the public services, we'll talk about it a little bit later when we go through examples. But I think, anyway, what happened to within this neoliberal phase of capitalism is really just a further accumulation by dispossession and enclosure of whether we talk about commons in Yugoslavia or we talk about the public in other parts of the world, but we actually are talking still about the enclosure of something that was shared among a community or society. And actually, what happened within this context of accumulation by dispossession, as to borrow Harvey's term, is something that in the Ministry of Space we actually recognized as some kind of a reactualization of commons, which has happened since Elinor Ostrom, as Ivana mentioned, Elinor Ostrom, but actually really it was for us, for example, in Serbia, and I think in the region as well, was actually a wave of re-recognition of something that is not only coming as a commons, as a really like commons from the Western Europe, but also re-recognition of our own legacy, the socialist legacy and self-management legacy, which has happened actually as a reaction to this accumulation, this possession. And for me, what is interesting is this assumed rationality, as I put here in a presentation, which is very obvious in this famous Garrett Hardin article, which is the tragedy of the commons from the 68, and where he claims that where he claims exactly this assumed rationality of the capitalist logic, which is that everyone is where everyone is looking for their own interest, and so therefore there is no possibility to keep or to sustain any kind of common resource. Actually, what Elinor Ostrom did was actually to react to that kind of assumed rationality, and through a research that she did to put out this kind of logic of commons as some kind of a counter narrative that actually really re-questioned, at least for some of us, re-questioned this assumed rationality, and introduced what is going to proliferate into, we're going to talk about later, a critical theory of commons. Just to go back briefly on what Hardin said, actually he analyzed he put a pasture on as an example, and he analyzed how a commonly governed pasture has a tragic, as the tragedy of commons has a necessarily a tragic end. So the only two proposals, only two options that he gave were either transform commons into a private property, or transform it into a public property, but as emphasized here, allocate the right to enter them. So in a way, limit the access to the resource, whatever it is. I mean, he did talk about the pasture, but as I said, we will talk about later how we can talk about different kind of resources. But just to illustrate with this citation, this is just to illustrate this logic that the selfishness or the selfish interests are somewhat of a natural interest of someone. So therefore, the commons as like a commonly used and commonly governed resource is doomed as a notion. So on the contrary, what Elinor Ostrom actually proved, based on really hundreds of cases of common-based models and resources, she actually proved him wrong. And as she said, and I quote it here, so neither the state or the market is uniformly successful in enabling individuals to sustain long-term productive use of natural systems. I have to say, of course, that we recognize that she was mainly talking about the natural resources. But anyhow, I mean, as some kind of a pioneer of this reactualization of the commons, we have to recognize actually her contribution to just disruption of this, as Ivana wonderfully said, this dichotomy of the state and the market as the only two logics that exist in governing or using resources. So what Elinor Ostrom did, based upon these hundreds of cases of common-based practices, she actually formulated 8 universal principles of the institutional design of commons. These are the principles. We won't go through each of them. I mean, we can in the discussion part if you want to, but I think some of those can really really be. I think we feel some of them very close to our hearts when we think of what is happening today in our cities. For example, I just picked number 3, ensure that those affected by the rules can participate in modifying the rules. for example, the Ministry of Space is working, is investing much of its effort into this participation in the urban development. So this principle of that those who are using any kind of resource have to be part of the decision-making process that governs the resources is, for us, and I'm sure for many of you or all of you, something that is actually like a starting point of understanding or envisioning some kind of resource and how it's governed. Just to also have some kind of critical distance to this. These are the principles that she has set when she wrote the famous book in the 1990s. But of course, this as it is called the classical theory of commons, coming from the Eleanor or drawing from the Eleanor Ostrom, is something that has transformed and is still transforming. And I think that from the feminist perspective, this kind of re-questioning and transforming, self-transforming is a crucial part of this commons paradigm. So it has to always keep this kind of capacity to re-question its practices and its principles. Just to maybe turn to really basic elements of the commons. There are three elements: resource, community, and governance. So there is this resource that we can really consider different things as resource. We can consider material resource or immaterial resources as knowledge, as I will go through examples later. We can talk about natural, social resources, private, common, or public resources. I'm sorry for the pronunciation, but rivalrous or non-rivalrous, which means that when there is a rival or rivalrous resource, that means that when we use it, when I use it, one user, actually it stops other users from using it, or the resource itself is diminishing with the use. In opposition to that, we have things as like knowledge, Wikipedia, where we have actually a resource that is actually not in any way decreasing or diminishing, however we use it, or however many users it has. So it's excludable or non-excludable, referring to the regime of the use, whether we in a way limit the access or not, and whether it's a service or good. So just to give the illustration of the diversity of resources we can talk about. Then the second element is community or the commoners. And here we really talk about different kind of communities. So they can be territorially in one place, or they can be dispersed and be it online community or whatever, international community, doesn't matter. And it has some kind of shared system of values, norms, and needs, because the very community actually is part of, or is participating in establishing what is actually a system of governance. So the governance regime. The governance regime is actually the way, or the system of rules, how we use and how we produce, if it's also a production of a resource. So how we produce and use this resource is actually a part of this governance regime. And I put here some of the points that I would like to talk when we talk about the examples later on. What kind of structure there is, or what kind of structure is the most suitable or adequate for a certain resource. Whether there are some formal institutions or informal structure, how the decision-making procedures function. Is there a strict regulation or not? And also this, I put a question mark on the sanctions because Elinor Ostrom, for example, as one of her principles, she mentions sanctions. And I would like, if you want, I would like to pose a question for a discussion, whether the sanctions are a part of this regulation structure, regulation process. One of the things I would also like to point to is why we talk about the or what would be a difference in the contemporary context that we are all part of. What is the difference between private, public, and common good, or rather public and common good? I think that might be more of a relevant question when it comes to these three elements. And what I would say the most distinctive issue about, between the public good and the common good is that today, when we talk about the public goods, we actually talk about the state being responsible for this governance regime, or for the rules of accessibility, or for the rules of use. And the state, as we all know, is a very good and very close partner to the market and to the capitalist logic. So, and in functions in the capitalist logic. So in a way, what we have, I will talk for Serbia. I mean, I can claim it for Serbia, but I think you would agree that what we have, for example, with the public goods is a kind of whether it's regulated or deregulated, but it's actually a privatization of the public goods. So in fact, whether it's explicit or implicit, we have public goods that are actually de facto not accessible to all people, and that are used rather for a particular private interest. So in that sense, what we have when we talk about public versus common good is that the common good asks for a community that will collaboratively or collectively decide on, hopefully unlimited access, and that will also be also as the community of producers and users. So it will have a different relation to the, not a centralized relation or not a centralized power of decision making towards in relation to a certain resource. Just wanted to illustrate also a point that we should be also very critical to the practices that resemble commons. Okay, so the sharing, the cargo and Airbnb also started as some kind of sharing practices, but have been highly commodified and have been co-opted by the capitalist system or logic, and are today very much, at least the Airbnb, I can talk from the point of the spatial policies and the right to housing. Airbnb has become as toxic as the state that supports the investors into profitable housing. I mean, so I just wanted to make this point that I really think that we should be always, however seducible this commons is, and I mean, my motivation, my personal motivation, in this towards the commons is really because I believe it has the potential, the concept has the potential of some more substantial change, but still we really have to be very critical about different practices that have that have some of maybe or have started as commons based or has some kind of commons elements to it. So from this classic theory of commons that Elinor Ostrom has in a way founded, we have something that is called the critical commons theory of commons, and it is closer to my heart, and it is actually it has politicized this notion of commons. So unlike this positivistic approach that Ostrom has demonstrated in a way, which is I really don't want to denounce the value of it. I'm just, for me, the critical theory of commons is really a kind of a contextualization of something that is called the classic theory of commons. So it's kind of like it has only sharpened its political potential. So unlike this kind of wannabe neutral analysis of the practices, we have this kind of normative approach that is characteristic for the critical theory of commons, that understands commons as a tool for the wider social, political, and economic transformation, and has a very clear non-neutral political position. And also, unlike the attempt to in a way set the institutions that could be based on the common principles, as Ugo Matei claims, we have a critical framework of the commons that is actually including also into this commons paradigm the practices and the struggles that demand the resources to become a commons. So it's also, in a way, not only a proposition for institutions, but also a demand for institutions to be brought back to a common, or as Ivana also mentioned in the introduction, to some kind of a radical democratic logic. So this is just also an overview of the normative criteria that Silke Helfrich has suggested, which corresponds, you will see here, corresponds to these three basic elements of commons: resource, community, and governance. And we talk about, when you talk about criteria, we talk about sustainable use, fair access, and collective control. And when it comes to values, the normative ones are, ecological sustainability, social justice, and democracy. So, as I said, I mean, in my perspective, really a critical theory of commons is only, in a way, an upgrade and like a political sharpening of what has been set by the classical theory of, or the Ostrom's principles. And the last thing before we go to the examples is something that I wanted to say as both a personal position and also something that I hope we can discuss about. And it's always this relation between the commons and this state and market. And on the one hand, we have commons against the state as one end of this dichotomy and market as other. But also, I would say that the possible interpretation could be also commons against the state and market as like a neoliberal state and market as two very close partners. So we have these different models or different modes of relation between these ends, and we can discuss on perhaps different examples whether we recognize some of these modes in these examples. But what I would say is that on the one hand, what I see, not me just, but both Zajedničko platform and the Ministry of Space collective that I belong to, what we recognize as a political potential is really that the commons represents not only this analytical apparatus, which is valuable and it helps to articulate what we are trying to do, but also it really is something that from the practical point of view proves that different production relations are possible, the different models of governing are possible. And hopefully, you know, it represents some kind of sparkle for a wider radical change in the social change. So, but also I wanted to also set some questions that I think, not me just, but you know, from what has been an experience and also from what others have recognized as limitations and risks. One of them is the scale. I think it's a very important question. David Harvey questions this as well. You know, to what scale can we talk about this and you know, collective governance, and how it transforms from the scale of the local community to perhaps the scale of something that doesn't have to be called state, definitely not a national state, but I mean, whatever, you know, higher level of some political organization. And then, you know, and how, as I said, how it transforms, how this kind of governance and how it functions on different scales. Also, we have to talk about what happened to some of the commons. At least I can talk about some in Belgrade, definitely. How can, you know, where did some of the commons-based practices, how they have been appropriated, how they have been actually turned into these gentrification model the mechanisms, and also how we also face this in Belgrade in many occasions, how this commons practices can be completely depoliticized, and in that way made very benign or in a way not transformable, you know, or not. Then it lacks its transformational potential. So to go quickly through some of the examples, just to look at the time, I'm sorry. Okay, so we'll go through very quickly through some of the examples, and hopefully maybe if you want, we can go deeper into them in the discussion. So common urban gardens are something I would say it's very currently, I'm trying to avoid the word popular, but they are very present as practices in our societies, and maybe for example for us, we have this new master plan of Belgrade happening, and we have a very right-wing, as you know, probably most of you know, right-wing party on the very authoritarian in power. And for example, they are very keen on urban gardens, and our, you know, fear is, you know, how they will misuse or appropriate this concept of urban gardens when talking about the development of Belgrade in this new master plan, 20-year master plan. Anyway, the library of things, another example that can be very easily implemented in small local communities, but I'm just posing the question, you know, whether these kind of examples and under what conditions can they have a more wider potential, political potential. So we go now we go through different examples. This is a green network of activist groups, ZMAG, from Croatia. It's a very small municipality near Zagreb, and what they try to do, in resistance to this capitalist logic, they try to actually to establish some kind of settlement that is not only in its physical structure sustainable, which it is, but only in the way they are organized as a community, in which they grow their own food resource, they extract resources from the nature. So the way they, not only the way they are built, as I said, as a physical structure, but also the way they are governed, and then they, how they make decisions together and govern actually the entire community, is actually based on the commons logic. Another example that I wanted to go through is the really global trend, and as I said, it refers to this second primitive accumulation, from as Ursula Hughes calls it. So it goes as a reaction to the trend of privatization of public resources and services. I'm sure we are all aware of what it means, and at least here in Belgrade, in Serbia, we are very close to it. I mean, to the entire privatization of some of the public resources. You can, I mean, from maybe some of you can have heard about the protests that have been going on this weekend. They have to do with exactly this trend. So, and deprivation of basic services for increasing number of people. So this kind of narrative of the ineffective, corrupted public sector that has to be privatized in order to be more efficient, in order to have more quality service. And I mean, I'm sure that you all are very familiar with this narrative. But anyway, there has been a huge wave of actually demands for remunicipalization of these kind of public services across Europe and the globe as well. And the Transnational Institute from Amsterdam has actually made a very comprehensive study about these practices of remunicipalization. And as you can see from this slide, there are different sectors where this is a relevant issues, from water supply to waste management, public transport, education, energy, and so on. So it's something that has been, as I said, a trend for many countries and in different ways. I mean, I'm sorry that I don't have time to go into that, but there are very different situations where these remunicipalizations have happened, and in different modes, of course, with different costs as well. But in the end, the cost of the privatization has always been the cost that has been socialized. So it has been a cost for all the citizens, whereas the remunicipalization, even although it has been in some cases also the cost of the entire society, it has also brought the benefit for the entire society. So they have issued another in the 2021, and I mean, I wrote these sources so we can check them out if you want to go deeper into all these subjects. But they have issued another publication in the 2021, which is solely focused on this kind of democratic and collective ownership of public. So it's in a way focused on this governance model and this public community collaboration. I think it's very valuable, and I recommend all of you who want to read it. I just wanted to also demonstrate, to show a different kind of resource that is not necessarily physical. We have a memory of the world, so it's an open access or open source library. So we talk about the knowledge. It is not a rivalrous resource, and it has really through all their presentations, they have really explicitly stated how they are reacting to this commodification, to this global commodification of knowledge and this limited access to knowledge and source of information. So it's very useful, and it's really also a very democratic tool where everybody is in a way, becoming a librarian who contributes to this resource and also use it in return. So this is just an illustration how this how this resource looks like. Also, I wanted to, in a way, show a little bit how this platforma zajedničko functions, and how we also try to make some kind of contribution to this commoning of knowledge. And we made a sorry, this small Wikipedia of this economic democracy, which has different wiki articles on different aspects and models and principles of the economic democracy that are available to everyone, and also everyone can contribute to this Wikipedia. Another one, I think, probably close, I mean, I know Ivana knows it very well, but probably close to many of you, is this Cultural Center magazine in Belgrade, which has been, in a way, this kind of, we are all proud of this practice of magazine, because it has proven to be really like a paradigmatic model of the commons. And not only that, it actually established this kind of cultural center that is really not only open to the users, but it really includes and invites all the users to participate in its programmatic and operational functioning. And I think it's a very, I mean, it has been open in 2007, so it has been 13 or 14 years now that it has been functioning and improving its model. And I think the part of the success of Magazine Cultural Center is that actually it invests resources into really articulating and re-questioning its approach to the governing and the use and the access to use. And so it has several spaces. It started, as it says here, in the former. It started as is a way, in a way, as a squatted knowledge warehouse. Knowledge was a publishing house. It had this very strange and in a way still not resolved connection to this official public institution. It's a Belgrade Youth Center, but you know, regarding of this strange, as I said, relation, which was in a way, you know, official and then not, and now it's also, it's again a question whether it should be in a way formalized or not. But anyway, the, you know, regardless of this formalization of the legal entity or the legal status of magazine, it has really evolved, you know, through these 14 years into, as I said, a really articulated and formulated model of commons. So it hosts really different kind of programs and different kind of cultural and artistic communities that are part of magazine. It also has this kind of open calendar, which has grew over years. And it's really a kind of a radical democratic resource that where everybody that participates can really use the space. Just in this is in a way a mechanism of coordination. And all the decisions are made collectively. And as I just said, I just wanted to show you, and you can, for those who are, yeah, it's in English, okay? So it's accessible in their website, but I think it's very good that they have transformed their practice and their experience into something that is also a model that can be used and modified, of course, for other cultural centers, not just in Yugoslavia, but in, maybe also in other countries as well. And I just wanted to show this as briefly, that it actually established a kind of structure that is very clear and it's very transparent to all the communities or all the artistic initiatives that are approaching the magazine and are becoming part of it. So it has a very transparent, structure of governing, and also very participatory. It has also program priorities, values, also the practices and the programs that are prohibited. So it's very open and transparent in how it functions, and it also welcomes always, it's always open for other participants to become part of the magazine as well. Street gallery, something that is a Ministry of Space baby, it's a public space that has been in a way commodified, not commodified, but commodified into this kind of street gallery open for different artists. First of all, it was local and regional, but then it actually grew into an international exhibition space, and not just exhibition space, but really a cultural space for different kind of cultural and artistic programs. So it started actually from an unused public space. On the right, you have a huge Dom Sindicata. It's like a union building that has, of course, been commodified and became it became like a cineplex hall. And then on the left, behind this wall that you see here in the picture, you have some kind of closed square. Doesn't really matter, but this was a passage that was really unused. And so in this very exciting and extraordinary story between the Ministry of Space and the municipality authorities, they have agreed to use, for the Ministry of Space to use this as a public exhibition place. And just to illustrate really the diversity of the programs that has been and are still happening. At one point, 2 years ago, the Ministry of Space didn't have the capacities to run it or to manage it together with other collectives, artistic collectives. So it actually transferred the managing part to the Matriarchia, which is also an artistic collective, and now it functions, I mean, in the same model. It's very open, very participatory and transparent. It just changed this formal entity behind it. And just to end, I promise, it's already 8 o'clock. I promise just, I'm near the end. I just wanted to show some of the examples that are perhaps maybe closer to my own experience. One of them is the housing cooperative. The point is just to really show the diversity of the resource that we can consider as commons. So this is a housing cooperative in Spain, Barcelona. It's La Borda, and it was initiated in 2013, and the process of actually making the cooperative and making the building itself has been really participatory for all the people involved in it. And it is also not a private property. It's kept as a common property, and it's commonly governed as well through different structures. I would say maybe similar to those that you've seen in magazine. So it has some working groups, it has an assembly of all the tenants. So it functions really in not only in this property regime, but it also functions as in a governing regime as a commons. And finally, just to underline in a way what Ugo Matei pointed as this way of understanding the commons, is that we don't only talk about the resources and some kind of informal institutions of common governing, but we can also talk about the struggles for commonification of different resources. So in that way, I just wanted to show this housing equality movement. It's a very recent emergence in Serbia, but I think it's very important because of all the trend that is happening worldwide in housing and the complete inaccessibility for a growing number of people. So in a way, this fight, the joining of the fight of different anti-eviction, cooperative housing movement and or initiatives, we have joined in a way in order to really not only advocate, but really offer some very, very proposition and protests and direct actions towards the right to the housing and towards this the more radical transformation in approach to housing. So that's it for me. I'm sorry if I went too fast, but we can talk about maybe details or some of the points. I just wanted to go through both this some kind of elements of this concept, but also through some of the examples that maybe we can discuss later.
Thank you, Jovana, for the crash course in commons. You know what? I'm asking my colleagues to gather questions if we have, because we are now open for questions. While we're doing that, because both you and me and our common colleagues, we have been going through this topic, presenting it within more formal or less formal environments, and whenever I talk about this or give presentations, I still face this very commonly found attitude among people, even those that might be interested in the model. The problem with the public-private partnerships, they are called partnerships, and they are usually widely accepted by people because there is this illusion that once the formal institution, be it on local or national level, isn't able to maintain it, once it gives it to a private proprietor, they take better care of it. I'm sure you have done your fair share of research, probably maybe in the area of housing, but can we briefly just say, what's the problem with the private-public partnerships?
Yeah, thanks, Ivana. That is an important question, and I think it's really it's really an I don't know, urgency question for our region. Yes, I mean, the public-private partnerships are very popular, and I mean, they are even recognized in our law, for example, unlike civic partnership, civic public partnerships. And I mean, it's very it's a very contradictory logic to this. To the public-private partnership, because the public part should have a public interest in mind, and the focus of the public interest, whereas the private part has necessarily, I mean, in order to survive in a capitalist society, has the profit in, you know, as a primary interest. So you have this profit versus public interest in contradiction in itself, and where it ends always. And that this is why I mentioned this TNI, the Transnational Institute, a great study that shows, I mean, very, you know, it's evidence-based study that shows how most of these public-private partnerships end. They always end in lack of accessibility for all citizens to certain public services or a certain resource, and they end in profit for the private part, whatever the company or however the, you know, this private entity is shaped. So it's and yeah, so the biggest danger comes when the basic services are regulated through this public-private partnership, because then, you know, you have people lacking access to drinking water, to heating, to housing, you know, so to these basic needs and basic rights. And yeah, and then the remunicipalization comes to
Yeah, and to add I would like to state the next, let's say, level, which, as you said, the public-civil partnerships, which are not recognized by most of our laws. I think in Croatia they changed the agricultural law just specifically for the pasture of Gajina when they were institutionalizing their own governance model. But somehow even the civil public partnerships are not the essential, let's say, commons-based governance model, and I see them, you know, just like this transitional model to reach the point, which maybe magazine on paper with contracts is not such, because as I saw in the presentation, and I never knew actually that part of the regulation around the magazine, but we have Pogon as one of the first established public-civil partnerships. And as of recently, there is such an attempt between the independent cultural scene in Macedonia, North Macedonia, and the municipality of Center. I will like to actually discuss shortly just one more dichotomy with you. I saw that you already mentioned that, but we did when we did the research of the case studies, and it was even done before that, we detected there are two models of the commons. One is the governance model, and one is the struggle. Would you like to just briefly maybe discuss the difference between these two manifestations of commons?
Yes, actually, Ivana, inspired by the publication that you have made with Ipe and Alma Mitic, I mean the Green Book. famous Green Book, we actually made some kind of, I would say, complementary publication,
Yeah.
which is the Spaces of Commoning. It actually covered, since the first one covered Croatia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, and Macedonia. Then the second one it covered Kosovo, Serbia, and Montenegro. That's why it's really complementary, as it territorially covers, but it actually refers to the first one, and it also covers both practices and the struggles. So it uses the similar methodology. And from, I think, including the struggles, as I said, it really recognizes that it's not only about the very existing or maybe made institutions, but it's also recognizing this political, it emphasizes rather this political aspect of fighting for the fighting for this establishment or re-establishment of these commons around different resources. So it's for me, including the struggles in this kind of analysis or mapping, let's say it, is for me recognition that the very fight for it is also a kind of comes in within this commons paradigm. And I just wanted to say something that for us was interesting. For when I say for us, meaning for this second book, this Kosovo, Montenegro, and Serbia mapping, was that often there was the actors within this, whether it was a practice or the struggle, the actors were really not necessarily or articulating their own practice through this terminology of let's say commons, but de facto it was that. So even if they do not recognize this notion or this apparatus of this theoretical apparatus of commons, they are demonstrating and they are thinking through what is really actually a commons. And just another point, I'm sorry, because we're there, is another point for me. At the beginning, it was a kind of, I had to be honest, it was kind of not disappointing, but a little bit of that, was that some of the practices and struggles did not relate their practices and struggles to any part of the legacy of the self-management in the socialist Yugoslavia. So they just didn't see any kind of connection, or didn't particularly articulate this any kind of relation to it. And as I said, my first impulse was kind of a disappointment, but then when you look at what these practices and struggles bring to the local community, and this transformational potential they have, it's actually that matters.
To add to that, I would like to mention that researching this, the struggles, as we have seen in our region, sometimes they were for the protection of the common good, or of something that we consider to be a common resource, be it space, be it an institution or something immaterial, but also during the course of that struggle, which were usually protests, I don't know, some creative interventions, media performances, communication with institutions, with alliances, making alliances. Those practices themselves somehow, to different extents in different struggles, turned into commoning itself. I would
Agree.
I would briefly just like to mention, for example, the university occupations that happened throughout the cities in the whole region. In the beginning, not in the beginning, but formally, let's say the first argument of that struggle was against the privatization and the very bad maintenance situation in the higher education. But then when they occupied the physical space of their universities, the way they organized their lives there, and which lives consisted of giving, holding the lectures that they were supposed to lose with the occupation because the professors are not going to work, but also like organizing food because they were also living there. And so some commoning practices were already established through the struggle for for some maybe some impossible to reach governance model. And I would like to mention this because again, in discussion with people, the commons governance model seems to be unapproachable just because of the regulation that we have, the legal systems, the experience, as you mentioned, with the previous governance models and the states and so on. And that's why I think it is really, really important not to only look at the, end goal of those struggles, but actually look at the practices that were applied during that struggle.
I completely agree, Ivana. I completely agree that is absolutely the case with our experience as well. I mean, it's. I mean, also the practices that the practices that have become. Practices that have started with this ambitious idea of being commons have also transferred into something that has been not common. So it's both ways. It's also, I think, important to recognize the process as a very important aspect of the entire thing. So within the process, this commons features, can really authentically just emerge as part of the way we collectively figure out how to govern something or how to produce something, but also something that we already preemptively envision as commons can very easily slip into something that is just opted or co-opted.
Yeah, and the reason why I'm mentioning this is precisely that, because we're, with the Lokomotiva, we're trying to put this whole theory and practice in the context of art and culture, both as practice, but also as some civilizational activities. That's why I'm mentioning, because most of the struggles have generated so much cultural value or even artistic value, as if we go back to starting with the movement for Varšavska and then just ending with the struggle, I don't know, against Nedavimo, against
Belgrade
waterfront, yeah, through Nedavimo Beograd, and to even build up on that and probably finish with this, last week we had the panel discussion where we were discussing the position and the perspective of art and culture in this issue. The Eleanor's Ostrom theory, but also the other theoreticians you mentioned and some other that we didn't even touch upon today, do place many other activities, practices in this whole framework of the commons, because once such a big governance model is imposed, a new value system has to be generated. No longer the things that we value now and the ways in which we value and estimate or even count, measure the well-being are not applicable to each other. And to be even more precise, what I'm talking about is for example, the refusal of the GDP as a model that measures
Absolutely.
well-being, but also like conviviality, cultural production, ecofeminism, you know, the inclusion of the, or maybe the formalization, the institutionalization of the practices of the disenfranchised, native and otherwise, marginalized communities, and which is where we are headed to next, and that's why I'm mentioning those.
I agree, Ivana.
Jovana, this was a really nice intro to the theory of commons, and I would just like to ask you if you feel like you missed something important to say. This is your last chance.
No, I mean, it's obvious that it needs an entire set of meetings or conversations, but no, I mean, just hopefully it just opened some of the questions, or maybe sparkled some curiosity, but yeah, I mean,
I
hopefully
tried
we will
to,
have time.
yeah, I tried to sum up the main questions that arise when this issue is posed. So
No, you absolutely did. I mean, I'm just saying this actually deserves a whole set of conversations. But yeah, I think we have touched upon on the surface some of the main points.
Well, thank you for that so much, and this is how we will wrap this year with this topic, and starting with next year, hopefully we will collaborate even more and bring this synergy of art and culture at the edge of environmental crisis and the inequalities it produces even more. Thank you, Biljana, thank you, Lokomotiva, and thank you, the colleagues from Lokomotiva who were the technical and logistical support of this lecture. Jovana, stay safe in Belgrade. It's quite messy there. Oh well, in the whole state of Serbia actually, and I wish you great success with the movements.
Thank you, and thank you all from me as well. Thank you, Ivana, and thank you, Biljana and Lokomotiva, and yeah, you'll see. Hopefully, we'll keep on going on the streets, and something has to happen. Change. Thank you.
Ciao.
Bye.